Right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to the next talk in this room. I would like to say in this festival, because there are talks going on all over the place in this festival. So the next talk today, which will be on mass observation. Before I start it, I've been asked to just tell you a little bit about the Being Human Festival, and I think some of you may have heard this already if you've been to our talks. Apologies, I've been asked to do it. So welcome. This event is part of the launch day for Being Human, which is the UK's first national festival of humanities. This new festival is led by the School of Advanced Study at the University of London in partnership with the Arts and Humanities Research Council and the British Academy. And it aims to demonstrate the vitality, vibrancy and relevance of the humanities through a national programme. So events that are happening today are also happening for the next couple of weeks all over the rest of the country. All the events taking place today in Senate House will be coordinated by the School of Advanced Study and explore what it means to be human in a digital age of too much information. Don't forget, sorry, I'm trying to read this and I'll on the computer. Don't forget to follow the festival on Twitter at Being Human Fest and tweet during this and other events using the hashtag BeingHuman14. If I realised, sorry, I'll put it up there to make it quite clearer for you to do. But please do, because one of the things we're going to talk about mass observation is the use of Twitter and how we can mass observe using things like Twitter as well today. So it'd be really cool if you do a bit of tweeting too. So, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Fiona and I'm the Curator of the Mass Observation Archive at the University of Sussex.
And I'm Jessice Scantlebury, I'm a Senior Archive Assistant for the Mass Observation Archive.
We are doing a bit of a two Ronnies session today, although I don't think there'll be quite so many laughs. We are going to work together to tell you a little bit about an organisation called Mass Observation, which some of you may have visited our stall or heard about or spoken in other talks today. Mass Observation, which is a social survey organisation which has been operating since 1937. Mass Observation worked very briefly with the Ministry of Information in late 1940. It was a slightly uneasy relationship, but at the same time, it's strange it was uneasy because in many ways the two organisations should have worked very well together. And what we're going to do today is just tell you a little bit about that phase of mass observation, but try and link it in very much to their work on morale and trying to factor in what morale was like in the country in that phase, but also the work that we've done subsequently. So in late 1936, the news broke to the public that King Edward VIII was to abdicate his throne in favour of his brother George in order that he might marry the woman that he loved, as he said, the American divorcee Wallis Simpson. Despite the lengthy discussions that had taken place in the halls of power in the previous weeks and months to this date, the crisis, as it was termed at the time, was only made public a week before the King signed his abdication papers. And it was against this backdrop that mass observation was formed. Its protagonists had what writer Tom Jeffrey describes as a fascination with what they saw as the myths and superstitions of everyday life in the nation. And at that time they focused very much on the abdication crisis and the looming world war as the kind of myths and superstitions that surrounded these kinds of events. Jeffries points out that another key focus that he poetically describes as a deep distrust of the press and criticism of the inability of the press to fulfil its supposed function, that is, to bridge the gap between the rulers and the ruled. Mass Observation's founders include Charles Madge, who was a Communist Party member, a poet and a journalist for the Daily Mirror. And as a journalist, Charles Madge observed how rarely the opinions of the people on the street were ever taken into consideration when reporting. Similarly, Tom Harrison, one of his other colleagues in founding Mass Observation, saw the absence of understanding from the powers of the country, absence of understanding the experiences and beliefs of the everyday people on the streets. He believed that by using scientific and anthropological techniques that had been used on expeditions such as ones that he recently returned from places in the Far East, such as Borneo, that we could find out more about the habits and beliefs of distant cultures than we could for our own culture. So why could we not translate that understanding and those practices to understand our own culture and our own society? So mass observation was born. These two men came together in order to create this understanding. It set out to record the experiences, the lives, the opinions and the beliefs of ordinary people in Britain at that time, from 1937 through to the mid-1950s. After that, it sort of moved into much more market research, and we don't have the papers of that particular period. But the papers of the original Mass Observation Organisation moved to the University of Sussex in the 1970s and have been available ever since for anybody to come and use to find out about everyday life in Britain during that period, 1937 to the mid-50s. But actually, it also instigated the start of the new Mass Observation Project in 1981, which continues today, in which we still collect data on everyday life. But what we want to concentrate on today is mass observation and morale. And that kind of links very much in with this building, Ministry of Information, and some of the work that Mass Observation did with the Ministry of Information in the 1940s to assess that morale. Mass Observation set out with the idea that they were going to use everyday people to be the cameras of everyday life, so that we would observe ourselves, and by observing ourselves we would place that on record, and then we could make that record available to us and our neighbours to understand how we function, and therefore try and make a better society as a result of this. Quite a lofty ambition, really. And in fact, they stated that they hadn't set out a quest for the truth and facts for their own sake, or for the sake of an intellectual minority of the academics or the government or whoever, but that they wanted to expose them in simple terms to all observers, so that the environment of all of us could be understood and thus constantly transformed. And that's what they said in 1937. So what did they do? They basically went out and they collected data. They had two methods of collecting data, one of which was to recruit a panel of paid investigators. And these investigators went out onto the streets and recorded everyday life. They watched, they listened, they observed, they noted it down. They went into cafes and they wrote down the conversations they could hear, the state of the decor in the cafe, and what food was being served and how much it cost. They sat on buses and listened to conversations and noted those down. They basically went into all aspects of life that they could think of and tried to record it, including one young lady who went out into, she got recruited into a factory, a munitions factory, and worked there for 1 year, noting down everything that she was doing, everything that her colleagues were doing, conversations, and then came out and wrote a book for Mass Observation about it. Now, we could discuss the ethics of that for hours, but that's not what we're here to do today. So, in addition to this, Mass Observation also recruited a panel of volunteer writers, so people from all over the country who would be recruited to record everyday life, everything they did. It started off as a sort of a project from, in fact the first one they did was May the 12th, 1937, which is the day that George VI was crowned, and they asked people to keep a diary of everything they did from waking to sleeping. And then as time went on, they started to ask these people to respond to questionnaires about everyday life, different things, rating from the very intimate aspects of life, such as relationships, dreams, your personal habits, through to your opinions on general elections, on world affairs, on film stars, all sorts of things like that. And also, many of the people who contributed were asked to keep diaries. And over 3,000 people contributed to this panel, of whom 500 kept diaries, sometimes for 1 month, sometimes for 30 years, between 1937 and the mid-1950s. So immediately you can see that Mass Observation started to gather this huge bank of data from people from all over the country, from all walks of life, sometimes writing again about the very intimate aspects of their life, and sometimes very, I'm not sure, how many of you keep a diary? Oh, not that many. I bet there'll be more. How many write blogs or tweets? Okay. Gosh. So not, that's quite surprising. I find that really surprising. But I would imagine that
Some people here listening to the radio.
maybe. Rather than reading what I blog about. Yes, yeah, they're all available at Mass Observation, so anybody can come and look at them and access them. So I think if we were to ask two of you to sort of compare your blogs or your diaries, one might be very, very personal and intimate, and someone might be someone just recording literally very practical, or things that are happening on TV or the media or so forth. So they'll be very, very different. But the thing that, as I said, that myself and Jessica want to talk to you about today is one of the foci that was very important for the Ministry of Information and also for mass observation, that was morale, particularly important, obviously, during that Second World War period. Mass observation was initially very, very active. The theme of happiness and morale has been revisited many times since the sort of since 1937. But of course, during that period of the war, it was really important in terms of trying to, for the Ministry of Information, trying to buoy morale. But for mass observation, they wanted to understand it, the truth of it. Were people really as happy as the films were portraying them to be, or the newsreels were portraying them to be? How do people really feel? And I think one of the powers of mass observations, particularly in the diaries, people reveal their fears. They reveal the fact that maybe it would be better just to give in to Hitler, because then the war would be over and everything could go back to normal. Others reveal that actually they were quite enjoying the war, because it allowed them a sense of freedom that they might not have had before, and so forth. So immediately you can start to see that diaries could reveal things that maybe the Ministry of Information, powers that be, might have found quite difficult if these things were publicised. So, one rather timely example that some of you may have seen examples of them at Mill and Hall, where we have stall, are mood charts. So almost 74 years ago to the day, November 1940, last week, 74 years ago, Mass Observation issued an invitation to a selected sample of its volunteer panel, asking them to take part in an experiment to find out how happy they were. It asked its recipients to complete what they called an attitude fluctuation chart, quite like that. Fluctuation chart for 1 week, starting on Saturday the 3rd of November, finishing on Sunday the 10th of November. Respondents were asked to use the chart to indicate their general mood each day between cheerful at the bottom of the chart and depressed, cheerful at the top of the chart and less cheerful at the bottom of the chart, giving reasons where possible. And you can see here that sort of there are this person's just given a very sort of straight indication of, yeah, a little bit depressed or unhappy on Sunday afternoon, but Thursday, they're pretty happy. A score out of 50 in terms of happiness, they're scoring at 30. But they haven't told us why. The next person, unfortunately you're not able to read this, but the next person is giving us reasons why as well. I'm rather intrigued. At Saturday noon, they're kind of not very happy at all, as you can see towards the end, because they've got a hangover. There you go, some things never change really. But what we decided to do when we were preparing for this talk was to see, because we were talking about data and information, was how could we actually try and translate this information into something that we don't have to go through 50 charts in order to see it, but equally, how could we just tell you immediately how people were feeling? And Jessica very cleverly came up with this chart, and we've got some big versions of it on our stall which you can come and look at, in which we started to break down those comments and say, well, what is it that people are saying making them happy or unhappy? Well, it's leisure, it's the weather, it's family. How many of these things are sounding familiar to you? 74 years on, these things are still either making us unhappy or happy. Maybe not so much the air raids. Let's hope we're not going to be affected by too many air raids. But you can see from here that on Monday, the 4th of November, there obviously is quite a large, there must have been quite a significant amount of bombing going on, because the big green blurb up there is telling us that the air raids were making people quite unhappy. The larger the dot, for those of you that are Guardian readers will probably understand all of this, the larger the dot, the more people mentioned it. Work by Saturday, the weather here on Saturday was obviously rather bad as well, because more people are moaning about the weather.
Still do that now.
Yeah. But what's interesting as well, we can see on Tuesday there's a big yellow block at the top, which relates to a lot of people really, really happy about the fact that Roosevelt was elected and how ecstatic they felt about this. And I know that when we were looking at it, we were thinking, oh, seriously, why are people so happy in politics? And then I remember how I felt in May 1997. We won't necessarily talk about what happens afterwards, but that whole idea of hope that can come with kind of political change. And as I said, if you want to find out more about this, then do come and have a look at our stall in Macmillan Hall. So, using these surveys together with wider data they collected from other methods, other surveys, other questionnaires, Mass Observation started to gather what it believed was a mood map of the country. And it published some of these in a book called War Begins at Home in late 1940, making observations on the Morag population. And as it's coming up to Christmas, we thought we'd share with you one set of observations that were made in relation to how the war was affecting Christmas shopping.
Okay. We have seen private business interests, for instance, competing with public state interests and competing successfully. As we go to press, the figures for the Christmas trade are not yet available, but our own investigations show that in reception areas, the Christmas trade is higher than ever, whilst in evacuation areas it has gone down. In one of the John Lewis stores, for instance, sales were up 8.6% on the same period last year, while in that other main Oxford Street shop, sales were only down 3.8% as compared with last year. But their Southampton branch shows 9.9% up, Southsea 9.6% up, Nottingham 3.2% up, Weston-super-Mare 27.4% up.
You see, some things never change. Still John Lewis, there's still how much money you can spend at Christmas time.
Okay, they go on to conclude that there is a need for a very Merry Christmas this year because people have felt so low and dull about the course of the war. If there had been an energetic and encouraging leadership all the way along, this condition would not have developed.
So relating to the work with the Ministry of Information and then subsequently sort of critique of the Ministry of Information, mass observation studies attempted to test the effectiveness of government's campaigns, including, for example, some of the poster campaigns. Some of you may have seen a poster called Black Widow, which was supposed to be about taking care during the blackout when you're driving, because you might make a woman like this into a widow if you aren't careful when you can't see where you're driving. It's quite logical, really. But that particular poster was taken out and people were asked their opinions of it. So again, kind of critiquing campaigns. But an illustration that we found was a survey on public reaction in two towns to a cabinet statement that was made in late 1940 that the war was going to last just 3 years. So slightly off, not quite. So basically, mass observation went out and surveyed people and said, so, you know, how long do you think this war is going to last? And you can see here that not many people, a lot of people thought it would be 3 years or more, but some people didn't believe the government. They thought actually it was going to be less. Substantially more thought it was going to be less than the government had actually claimed. And then we have the forever, the don't care. Seriously? But anyway, vague, not so sure, and then 29% don't know, genuinely don't know. And of this proportion, high proportion of can't answer, don't really know the answer, mass observation noted that the great majority of them were women, especially working class women, who were also the people who thought there never would have been a war in the first place, since it had been kind of wishfully thinking it away. We could again talk for hours about the notion of working class and whether or not how to mass observation and they were working class and all of that, but this isn't an academic essay, so we won't talk about that.
Okay, but mass observation said in the report, the truth is that the country is potentially united and is largely united in wanting to end the Hitler regime, but it is not yet united in the frame of mind towards the war or towards the future. The unity in those directions is superficial. There are many instances of disunity or confusion of opinion. For instance, in late November, 47% across the cross-section favoured hard peace, 36% favoured a tolerant peace, and 17% were regardless. While 32%, the largest group of any answering another question, could give no positive war aim, and another 17% gave a reason that was deliberately cynical or unpleasant, such as to save the capitalist money, for the Jews, and other slogans of the Hamburg broadcasts.
What's interesting about mass observation is the way that themes are often revisited, so that we can make comparisons and see how moods might have changed over a period of time. So the stuff that we've been looking at dates from 1940, but then in 1941, mass observation wrote a report on the effect so far of the war, the Second World War, on people's happiness. And here is a slide, again, sort of giving some of the data that mass observation collected about how people felt the war had changed their level of happiness. It took the qualitative data that it collected, so it's obviously kind of quantified it here with lots of statistics, but actually it was asking people. So it took the data of the responses from people and used it to establish various reasons for these changes. So whether, here we can see that not a huge amount of people had a slight increase, but actually quite a lot of people said there was little or no effect. 36% of men, but 26% of women saying little or no effect in happiness. They found various reasons, and one of the things I want to comment on is the positives, so people who decided actually it made them slightly happier. And various reasons they found included externalisation, freedom, and an increased appreciation of smaller measures since the war had started. And again, just a couple of quotes here. So one on externalisation.
Okay, this is a young man who was in the Navy. If anything, I find that war has slightly increased my happiness. It has made me feel that the running of the country and everything that goes on in it is much more my business and responsibility than ever before. I have a comforting feeling of living closer and with a closer community than previously, and I have less hesitation about speaking to people I have never met before.
And on freedom,
this is a young woman with 2 children whose husband is extremely jealous that she's become a nurse since he joined up. And she writes, I am made much happier. I now have a regular income, army pay plus my own wage. I also have a certain amount of freedom. I never go out without the girls, but now can do so as I like. I also have made plenty of new friends and have learned to laugh once more.
So these are just tiny, tiny little fractions of the amount of data that we've got in mass observation relating to morale. But what we wanted to do is move on slightly to sort of think about, well, how does it all play out today? And I mentioned earlier that mass observation started again in 1981, and over the last 33 years we've had a panel of volunteer writers. Over 5,000 people participated in this. I think at the moment we have about 300 or 400 people on the panel.
About 450
And they're all contributing their thoughts, their feelings, their opinions, their experiences about everyday life in Britain. More recently, we started to expand out from this volunteer panel, inviting people from all over the country to submit a diary of their day on the 12th of May. And I mentioned the 12th of May earlier as a kind of significant date, the first survey mass observation did. So we've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years, and last year we had over 1,000 people submitting diaries of their day, many of whom were actually young people and children as well, which is really nice to sort of get that sense of time. We also experimented last year by asking people to tell us what made them happy via Twitter, to use a hashtag and just tell us what made them happy. And we wanted to contrast this with a similar experiment that was done by mass observation in 1938, in which they invited people from the town of Bolton to tell mass observation what makes you happy. So to this particular, and this is the leaflet that was sent out to all households in Bolton asking them to participate. 226 people participated in 1938, and recently a couple of academic historians from the University of Sussex, where we're based, looked back through the data collected then to see if they could identify factors that determine individual happiness. And that's Claire Langhammer and Ian Gaisley. And they found that for most of the respondents, happiness was very much rooted in the home and in relationships with other people. So for example,
this is a housewife who's aged 43. Happiness in your home is to always be agreeable with your husband, never argue with one another, always smile and have a kind word for him on return from his daily toil. Always have his meals punctual for him, a nice fire, his slippers ready to put on, and look after him in sickness as you do in health. Keep what you promise at the altar and you will both be happy. I think she lays it on a bit.
I think so. Don't do that.
Bad housewife.
So Langhammer and Gaisley decided to rank the factors that made people happy in this competition. And actually the thing that ranked highest at the very top of the list was security. People wanted security, that's what was going to make them happy. That was followed in descending order by knowledge, religion, humour, equality, beauty, action, pleasure, leadership, and finally politics. So when in 2013 we decided to do our own straw poll on Twitter, we asked, I think then we had about 4,500 followers on Twitter, and we asked people to just say, well, tell us what makes you happy, what is happiness to you? We didn't get a huge amount of responses, interestingly, but those that we did, well, you can see an example just of what was coming through in terms of our mass observation, but what I've done is collate some of them here, and I'll leave you to read those. You see? I just want you to think about what I just mentioned earlier: security, knowledge, religion, humour. What have we got? Shopping. But you know, very simply, ability for women to walk down the street and not be catcalled or threatened. Day off, smoking peace. Happiness, cooking for those I love with a glass of wine and giggles on the side. So again, you can kind of see the similarities, but also differences over that sort of 70-year period.
Does it depend on the context of kind of your situation anyway?
Oh, completely.
So much so.
As I say, we could have a very long discussion about all of this, but yeah, it very much does. And that's the same as the survey that we're doing today. So we're asking people to tell us how you feel today, so that we can record it and have it. But of course, how you feel today is very, very different to how you feel yesterday, because maybe you were at work yesterday.
How much difference is there between what people think will make them happy and what actually is?
Don't know. Yeah, exactly. Commissioner directive and ask.
What date was that question asked on?
This one, it was it May?
It was in May 2013, but I can't remember what day. It was a weekday. I remember I was at work on the day.
It may even have been the 12th of May.
Yeah.
We can find out for you, but I don't know off the top of my head. So, what can this information tell us? Well, I'm just going to kind of wrap up by, I don't know, this sounds very glib really. For such a huge archive, we have over 3,000 boxes of material, and to be able to wrap this up in sort of a few lines is quite hard. But I would say that mass observation might not be able to tell us how every person is feeling on a given day. It might not be able to represent the feelings of an entire nation either, but it does highlight the events and the activities that can affect our morale. Perhaps more importantly, it also allows us to express this in more than a tick box of yes and no. In the early days, mass observation, it sought to give us an alternative view of opinion. But today, in the world of Twitter, Facebook, and countless other social media tools, we're able to express our feelings in public much more easily than people would have done in 1937. But perhaps it's the collective nature of something like mass observation, the notion that in another 75 years' time, there may be other people sitting in this very room listening to a talk about this, but understanding how we felt today in this room and as part of the event. From archives that we are hoping to create today at this event, but also that we're hoping to continue going on to create. And I think it's those things that make mass observation such an enduring way of collecting and recording everyday life. So please do come along and participate. We've taken a very simplistic route of a yes-no tick box, but giving you the opportunity to explain why you think you're happy or unhappy. Take a leaflet from our stall, come and visit us. Mass observation is open to the public. We're in our new home, the Keep, down at just outside the University of Sussex and just outside Brighton. And we're going to be creating an infographic from all the feedback we get today that we're going to put on our website, so we'll be able to tell the whole world how everybody feels. Very simplistic. But also have a look at some of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, again as part of this Being Human Festival, working with developers to find out if computers, if computer technology and artificial intelligence may be able to interrogate some of this data that we've got and tell us things that we can't necessarily pull out, or to tell us different things to what we're going to pull out. And my colleague James will be available in the Macmillan Hall to sort of talk you through that, if that's something you're interested in. How can artificial intelligence kind of work that way? And the final thing I was going to say is come and visit us, but I've already said that, so I'll say it again, come and visit us. Thank you very much.